I want you to just, for a second, close your eyes and imagine a really specific scene. It's the 1st century AD, you're a father in ancient Rome, and you're standing in the atrium of your house.
It's a huge moment.
It is. The midwife has just walked in with your newborn child, but instead of, handing the baby to your wife, or to you, she walks over and places the infant on the cold stone floor.
Yeah.
Right at your feet.
And then just silence. Everyone in that room, the family, the slaves, the midwife, they all just stop and look at you.
Exactly. They're waiting. Because in that moment, biology means nothing. What matters is what you do next. If you stoop down and lift that baby up, it's a ritual called sublatio, you're accepting it. You're saying, this one's mine.
But if you turn your back on it...
Right. If you just walk out of the room, that child is legally nobody's. It's taken outside and left on a hillside or by the river or on a literal trash heap.
That is such a visceral, chilling image for the modern mind. But that specific moment, that silence on the atrium floor, that was the absolute legal bedrock of the Roman family.
So rejecting the child wasn't even a crime.
No, not at all. It was considered a fundamental right of being a father.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today.
Oh.
We are doing a deep dive into what might be one of the most significant shifts in, well, the history of human rights.
It's a huge one.
We're tracing how civilization moved from seeing children as, I guess, disposable property assets you could just audit and discard, to seeing them as human beings with rights that the state has to protect.
We're basically looking for the ancient, messy, and frankly surprising origins of child protective services.
This is a massive topic. What kind of sources are we working with here?
Oh, I've brought a whole stack. We're looking at everything from the 12 tables of Roman law, letters from Stoic philosophers like Seneca and Cicero, and then all the way to the early church fathers and the legal codes of emperors Constantine and Justinian.
So we're tracing a war between two really big ideas.
Exactly. It's a war between the Roman idea of Patria Potestas, the absolute power of the father, and this incoming Christian concept of misericordia, or, mercy.
Okay, so let's start there with the Romans. Because when you say power of the father, I think most people imagine a strict dad who, I don't know, won't let you borrow the chariot on Friday night.
Right.
But the sources suggest something way darker.
Oh, it's so much darker. We are not talking about house rules. We are talking about dominion. The Roman legal concept is Patria Potestas.
Right.
The paterfamilias, the head of the household, held authority over his descendants. That was... Well, it was virtually unchecked by the state, and this included something called the amiesis vitae necessque.
The power of life and death.
The power of life and death, exactly.
So legally, a child wasn't even an independent person.
Not at all. Legally, they were more like an extension of the father's own will. Think of it less like a separate human being and more like a limb.
A limb.
Yeah. If a limb is gangrenous or just not useful, you cut it off. That was the legal framework. The state, it stopped at the front door. Inside the house, the father was the law.
Which brings us right back to that ritual we started with, the lifting, sublatio. It wasn't just a sentimental gesture, it was a full-on legal transaction.
Completely. The sources really emphasize this one phrase. A Roman didn't have a child, he took a child.
He took a child.
Yeah. That act of lifting the infant from the ground was the actual mechanism of acceptance. If he didn't do it, the child had no status. It was effectively erased from the family record before the ink was even wet.
So play that out for me.
Yeah.
The father looks at the baby on the floor and just decides no.
Yeah.
What's the actual process for removal?
This is the practice of expositio, or exposure. And we have to be really precise here because, well, the Romans were very precise lawyers.
Okay.
They made a distinction between this and infanticide. Infanticide was the active, bloody killing of a child strangling, drowning, that was often frowned upon because it involved what they called blood guilt. Exposure was passive. You just placed the child somewhere and left its fate to the will of the gods or, fortune.
That feels like a massive moral loophole. I didn't kill the baby, the hypothermia did.
That is exactly the logic. Or the wolves did. It allowed their society to function without the stain of direct murder.
Where were they leaving them?
Parents would leave infants in all sorts of places, wild wooded areas, the banks of the Tiber River, but the sources highlight some very specific, grim locations. There was a spot in Rome they called the lactation column.
Lactation column?
Yeah, it was a marketplace where wet nurses would gather to find work. So it became a popular spot to abandon a baby because the parents were, I guess, hoping a nurse might just pick it up.
A gamble on someone else's pig.
A total gamble. But more often, they were simply left on dunghills or in sewers, on trash heaps.
I want to just pause on the why here.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy for us to look back and just say, well, they were cruel monsters.
Right.
But these were normal people, Stoic philosophers even. What was the rationale?
It was coldly rational. The sources point to three main drivers. First, there was eugenics, and this was sanctioned by both law and philosophy. The 12 Tables, which is like the foundation of Roman law, their constitution, basically, it actually mandated that deformed infants be killed.
It was required.
It was required. And I found this quote from the philosopher Seneca. Now, Seneca is usually seen as this wise moral teacher, right?
The guy who teaches you how to be calm in traffic.
Exactly. Well, here's what he wrote about children. We drown children who, at birth, are weakly and abnormal.
Wow.
He equates it to slaughtering a mad dog or separating a sick sheep from the herd. He actually says it is not anger, but reason that separates the harmful from the sound.
So perfection, or at least utility, was the standard for whether you even had a right to live.
Yes. But the second, and probably the bigger driver, was just plain economics, poverty. If a family couldn't afford another mouth to feed, they exposed the child.
And it wasn't just the poor, right?
No, not at all. Wealthy families did it too, to limit the division of their inheritance. If you have 4 sons, your great estate gets chopped into 4 small pieces. But if you only keep one, well, the family power stays concentrated.
It's like pruning a tree to make the main branch stronger.
That's a perfect analogy, and this hit girls much, much harder than boys because of the dowry system.
Of course.
Raising a daughter was a huge financial liability because you eventually had to pay a large sum to marry her off. So the archaeological record shows this really stark gender imbalance.
I was reading in the notes about the death of Germanicus in 19 AD. That anecdote, it really just highlights how casual this whole thing could be.
Oh, that is such a wild detail. So Germanicus was this incredibly beloved member of the imperial family, the celebrity of his day.
Right.
When he died, the public was so distraught that the day itself was considered tainted, cursed, and the historian Suetonius tells us that parents exposed their newborn children simply because they were born on such an unlucky day.
That's just... The vibe is off today, so we're not keeping the baby.
I mean, it sounds insane, but it just underscores that children were options, not obligations. They were property to be managed, not lives to be stewarded.
So let's talk about the outcome for these kids. You leave a baby on a hillside. What's the best case scenario?
The best case. Someone picks it up. But even that best case is pretty dark.
How so?
The sources are graphic. I mean, many just died of exposure or were eaten by wild animals, birds, stray dogs, wolves. But for the ones who were picked up, their fate was almost always slavery.
There wasn't a formal adoption system for them.
No. You have to understand, there were professional slavers who would literally scour these abandonment sites. They were harvesting them.
Harvesting them?
Yes. They would raise these children, they called them alumni, specifically for labor or, very, very often, for prostitution. And because the child had been abandoned, they had no way to prove they were freeborn. They lost their entire identity.
It was a supply chain.
A massive supply chain for the Roman slave trade, fueled entirely by unwanted infants.
Okay, so that is our baseline. The child is property. Exposure is a tool for family planning. The legal system just shrugs. Now, we get the collision.
This is where the Judeo-Christian tradition starts to create some serious friction, and it starts with the Jewish roots.
Right.
Jewish law strictly forbade infanticide and exposure. It was rooted right in the commandment, thou shalt not kill. The Roman historian Tacitus actually wrote about this, and you can almost hear the confusion in his voice.
What did he say?
He was surprised that the Jews regard it as a crime to kill any late-born child.
Late-born, meaning
Yeah.
any child born after the father decided he had enough heirs.
Precisely. To the Roman mind, keeping a surplus child just seemed irrational. It made no economic sense. But then Christianity just explodes onto the scene, and they take this Jewish prohibition and supercharge it.
With a whole new theological layer. This is the Jesus view the sources talk about.
In a nutshell, yes. The Christian theological innovation was the idea of the incarnation, that God himself became an infant.
And that sanctified childhood itself.
Completely. And then you have the explicit teachings. Let the little children come to me. All of a sudden, a baby isn't just a potential adult or a failed investment. It's a bearer of the imago Dei, the image of God.
It seems like such a simple shift, but it completely upends Patria Potestas.
It does. If the child belongs to God or bears God's image, then the father doesn't have absolute dominion anymore. The child's value moves from utility, what can you do for the family, to intrinsic worth.
And before this changed any laws, it started changing behavior.
That's what's so fascinating. It did. The sources describe what we might call a kind of grassroots child protective services.
These are the stories of the families going to the trash heaps to rescue babies.
Yes. Ordinary Christian families would literally go to the dunghills, the sewers, the lactation column, and rescue these exposed infants. But here's the kicker. This actually caused a massive PR problem for the Christians.
A PR problem. You would think saving babies would be good press.
Not to the Romans. Pagan propaganda actually accused Christians of cannibalism.
Wait, what? Cannibalism? Seriously?
Yes. They saw these Christians collecting all these abandoned babies, and they couldn't understand why they would want them. The only reason they could imagine was, well, that they were eating them.
That shows a complete breakdown in understanding. They just couldn't compute the idea of altruism.
It just speaks to the cultural chasm between them. For a Roman, adoption was strategic. You adopted a grown man to secure an heir. The idea of rescuing a dying, non-kin infant just for the sake of saving a life was so alien to their mindset that they had to invent a nefarious reason for it.
So for these early Christians, adoption wasn't strategy, it was a gape. It was charity.
Right. They would baptize these foundlings, giving them a religious status because they didn't have a civil one. They were integrating them into a new kind of family.
So you've got these two worlds colliding. The Roman world where the father is king, and this growing Christian undercurrent where the child is sacred. Eventually that has to hit the legal system.
And that happens with the Emperor Constantine.
Yeah.
Early 4th century. He's the first Christian emperor.
And he's in a tough spot.
A really tough spot. He wants to stop exposure because of his faith, but he's also a pragmatist. He's running an empire that's economically shaky, and he knows if he just bans exposure, people will just kill the infants secretly.
So what's his move?
He tries to solve the economic root cause. Between 315 and 331 AD, he issues a series of laws. First, he tries a kind of welfare using imperial funds to help poor families so they don't have to dump their kids.
Oh.
But then he does something that seems, well, shocking to us. He legalizes the sale of children.
Wait, the Christian emperor legalized selling kids?
He did. And he ruled that if you found an abandoned baby, you had the right to keep it as a slave or free.
Yeah.
And the biological father couldn't just come back later and claim it.
That sounds incredibly backward. We want to save children, so let's make sure you can sell them.
It sounds barbaric to us, but you have to see it as a half measure born of desperation. Constantine believed slavery was better than death.
I see.
By guaranteeing the finder that they could keep the child as property, he was creating a financial incentive to rescue the baby. If he didn't, no one would bother. He solidified the property right of the rescuer to ensure the child's physical survival.
So the child is still a commodity, just a preserved one. It's a life-saving measure, but not a liberating one.
Exactly. It was triage. But the massive leap, the real birth of rights, comes about 2 centuries later with the Emperor Justinian.
This is the real turning point.
Oh, absolutely. This is the philosophy behind what we would recognize as child protective services.
Justinian, 529 AD. What changes?
Everything. Justinian looked at all the old laws, including Constantine's compromise, and basically said, this is revolting. He completely rejected the commercial view of rescue. He introduced the concept of misericordia mercy directly into the legal code. He decreed that all exposed children were legally free. Ingenui.
All of them.
All of them. It didn't matter if they were born to slaves or free citizens. If they were exposed and then rescued, their legal status was free. Full stop.
Wow. So he removed the profit motive for the rescuers. That seems pretty risky.
It was incredibly risky, but his logic was moral, not economic. He argued that if you rescue a child out of mercy, you cannot then turn around and enslave that human being. He said it was contrary to human nature.
He went even further, didn't he?
He did. He made it a capital crime to expose a child and then try to reclaim them into slavery later on.
So this is it. This is the moment the child stops being the father's property and starts being a subject protected by the state.
That is exactly what it is. It shifted the child from the private domain of the Patria Potestas to the public protection of the law. The state finally stepped in and said, this life has value and we will enforce its liberty regardless of what the father wants.
But that creates a practical problem, doesn't it? If rescuers can't make these kids slaves and the parents aren't keeping them, who takes care of them? You can't just rely on random nice people forever.
And that is where we see the birth of the institution. We move from grassroots rescue to the asylum. We see the rise of the brephotropia.
Brephotropia, that's a mouthful.
It's Greek. It literally means infant nourisher. These were asylums specifically for infants, funded by the church and state endowments.
Yeah.
This is the first time we see systematic social welfare for children.
The sources mention a specific figure, Datheus of Milan, who brought this west. This is a bit later, right? 787 AD.
Yes. Datheus established the first dedicated foundling hospital in the West, and he introduced this piece of technology that became iconic for, the next 1,000 years. The receiving cradle.
The wheel.
The wheel, exactly. It was a wooden cylinder set into the exterior wall of the asylum. A parent could come up to the building, usually at night, place the baby in the cylinder, rotate it so the baby moved inside, and ring a bell.
Total anonymity.
Complete anonymity. Datheus said the goal was to prevent the crime of murder by exposure. He knew shame and poverty were the drivers. The revolving door removed the shame.
It's like the medieval version of the safe haven baby boxes we have at fire stations today.
It is the direct ancestor of that system. Once the bell rang, the church took over. They hired wet nurses, they apprenticed the boys, they provided dowries for the girls.
They effectively replaced the father.
They replaced the paterfamilias with the institution. And that connects directly to where we are today. We move from a world where a father had absolute power to discard a child to a world where the state and the community say, if the parent fails, the institution takes over.
It is a complete 180-degree turn from the father is the law to the child has rights above the father.
It is. I mean, Justinian's legacy, that idea that adoption entails freedom and the state must protect the vulnerable, it directly parallels the modern UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. The journey from the dunghill to the brephotrophion is the journey of discovering the child as a person.
So let's just recap this because the contrast is so stark. You start with the Roman view. The child is property. Value is based on utility. If it's weak, or a girl, or just inconvenient, it's gone.
And the law says, go ahead, that's your right.
Then you get the shift, this belief that the child has intrinsic value. That leads to individual rescue, which creates friction. And eventually, the law catches up under Justinian, creating a protected legal status.
And finally, you get the institution, the safety net.
Right. But it's worth noting, that tension never fully goes away. The conflict between economic reality and child welfare that drove that Roman father to the hillside, that tension is still with us, just in different forms.
Absolutely. One thing that stood out to me was that, quote, summarizing the Roman mindset. A Roman did not have a child, he took a child.
It implies that parenting was a choice you made every single time.
Exactly. The shift we've described turned children from options into obligations, and obligations of the entire community.
From, I take this child because it benefits me, to, we protect this child because it matters.
Precisely. And that shift is the foundation of modern childhood.
It really changes how you look at something like a baby box or a social worker. It's not just bureaucracy. It's the result of a 1,000-year war over the value of a single human life.
Absolutely. A fight that was fought on hillsides, in courtrooms, and in orphanages.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. We've traced this journey from exposure on the hillsides to the protective laws of Justinian. In the ancient world, exposure was the solution to economic hardship. A brutal one, but a solution. Today, we have systems like CPS to stop that. But the tension between economic struggle and child welfare hasn't vanished. So the question is, how does our society currently expose its vulnerable children? Not to the elements on a hillside, perhaps, but to other systemic dangers when that safety net fails.
That is the question. The gung hill is gone, but the vulnerability remains.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.